You don't have a videotape memory. And it isn't obvious that the memories that you have of traumatic events are fully fledged and causally appropriate, but just not paid attention to. It's more like they're murky and unclear in and of themselves, and they contain too much. And I don't think that people so much repress as they do refuse to attend to or are unable to attend to. So it's more like a passive avoidance than a passive avoidance of something that needs to be explored and gone through, rather than it is something you know that you don't want to look at, that you or part of you has put away. Terrible things have happened to you, and you or some part of you doesn't want to know about them.
Hi. Today we're just going to take a quick look at a clip by Jordan Peterson, which is basically on defense mechanisms and repression. And it links in with Freud as well. Basically, in Freud had an idea of repression, that we have a conscious mind and an unconscious mind, which we would probably call today the subconscious mind, and that we tend to repress things which we cannot deal with. They go into the unconscious mind. And so this is Jordan Peterson's take on this aspect of how we repress things, and also the defense mechanisms, and also some slightly different ideas on it as well. So if we take a look at the clip that we just opened with there, he is saying that it's not necessarily that we have repression, but that it's something that we don't want to attend to. And I think that's an interesting idea. There's a therapy there called Gestalt therapy, and their approach to psychological issues was that things are simply pushed outside, either deflected from the conscious mind, so you never even see them, or that they are desensitized so that you don't feel them, but they're not actually repressed. And a lot of this is kind of like what Freud has a slightly different idea. He believes that things are repressed, or they basically bypass the conscious mind and go straight into the unconscious mind. And so there's different ways of thinking about things. Different psychotherapeutic approaches have different ideas about how we deal with trauma and how we deal with thoughts that disturb us and cause issues. And, it's all speculation on one level, because they're working anecdotally, and we don't know for sure who's right or who's wrong. But I would see probably space for both. So the traditional idea of repression is you don't even get a chance to see it. It goes straight into your unconscious mind, or what we call today your subconscious mind. And it tries to come out via things like symptoms and dreams and slips of the tongue and that sort of thing. A slip of the tongue is where you say the truth in the sentence, as it were. And this is something I feel Freud was very accurate about, that the repressed thought is forever, has its own little identity and is trying to escape. Now, Gestalt people basically, they don't like talking about the unconscious, but they believe that we don't want to deal with stuff. And this is more or less what Peterson is opening with here, is that it's not necessarily that we repress, but we don't want to attend to it. And what we can think of about this, I think both are relevant. The result is the same. You're not dealing with some trauma, you're not dealing with some thought that's unpleasant, you're not dealing with some life issue that you don't like dealing with. But the cause is slightly different. In the case of repression, it's something that the conscious mind simply could never deal with and is thrown into the basement, as it were, of repression. In the case of not attending to, or how we might in Gestalt deflect something or desensitize something, we kind of know it's there, but we don't want to look at it. And this is far more common if you look in real life. Like, a person is eating too much food and very obese. They know it's going to kill them, but they don't want to deal with it. Somebody keeps smoking when they've got all sorts of health problems and they don't want to deal with it. Somebody's got terrible finances but keeps spending money on credit cards. So they know it's there, but you don't want to deal with it. I think this is far more common, but it still has the same thing of that we're not dealing with it. Now, the big change actually is how they come to light. In the case of repression, it'll just go bang, it's back in. So, for example, when people do hypnotic regression therapy and they can't remember what happened in a trauma, and then with regression therapy, it just suddenly comes back. So in repression on lifts, it's like, whoa, I suddenly remember that memory. Oh my God, I suddenly have that feeling. Repression is like something escapes back out of the basement. In the case of denial or deflection or desensitization, Basically what's happening is we slowly have to face the thing we don't want to face. And bit by bit we start facing it, and it starts coming to light over time. And it usually comes as a series of small realizations or epiphanies. Not like one minute we haven't the memory, and next minute we have the memory. It's more like bit by bit we get our head around dealing with something we really didn't want to deal with. And there is a slight difference in that.
To know about them. And so they live those repressed experiences live an autonomous life of their own too. And here's an example of a trivial example of how that might work. Imagine that you're at work and your boss says something to you that disturbs you. Maybe it makes you question whether your job is stable. And so you're kind of upset about that, but it's a casual offhand comment, and you go back to work and you just sort of forget that even happened. Maybe because you're attending to something else. But then you go home and you're just crabby as can possibly be, and you go home and one of the people there says something a little annoying and you snap at them. It's like, well, that's analogous to what Freud would call a complex, right? Is that this, because you can imagine what's happened is that the boss's words have brought up a whole little sub-personality predicated on doubt up to the surface. And who knows how deep that would be? Well, what happens if I lose my job? And if I lose my job, well, what sort of person am I exactly? And what about all these other times that I've failed? And then maybe you remember the other times that you failed. And what am I going to do in the future? And so it's this whole cluster of ideas that surrounds that doubt. And that's been activated. It's a little part of you. And then maybe you're not attending to that because you're busy doing some other work. But when you go home, something triggers it. And it's already there. You get way more upset than you should. And that's what a complex is, except in a much more complicated manner. Like a complex might be a whole series of experiences that you've had that are united by some emotion, like threat, that haven't been transformed into a coherent representation, but that can rise out of the unconscious and possess you.
Okay, so very, very nice description here by Jordan Peterson regarding the nature of repressed thoughts and complex. I think he explains it very, very succinctly. So first of all, is from the Freudian concept of repression, is that when we have repressed thoughts, remember I'm telling the ones that go straight into the unconscious, you don't even know they got there, you're not even aware of them, even at preconscious level, they have their own reality. And Freud would talk in his book, The Interpretation of Dreams, how the dream is a wish fulfillment, and in the dream, the repressed thought tries to find a way out. So the very interesting idea, it's not really explored much in daily life, but it's a very interesting concept, is that we have a lot of subpersonalities, and that which was repressed has its own little identity and is trying to get out. So I think that's interesting. The second thing is complexes. I think he describes it very, very nicely, which is that a complex is one thing built upon another, and then somebody says something and you get triggered by it. Another way I would describe it in very simple terms is that when it rains a lot, the water table rises. And so you might see somebody stressed, and then something small happens, like they're driving their car, somebody pulls across, but you got bananas, you jump out of the car, they start shouting. It's very unlikely that they're like that all the time. Probably that they got so riled up, they're already riled up, they had a fight with their wife in the morning, their boss is treating them badly, they got financial troubles, and then it goes back to a chip on their shoulder they have because they always thought they did badly in life and that nobody likes them, going back to when they're a child, they're bullied, and so on and so forth. So we have a lot of thought complexes in their life, and they basically end up being something that we project into the world around us, and so we project the kind of reality around us based upon these complexities of thoughts that we have. And this backs up the idea of Freud says that everybody's basically neurotic. That in other words, nobody's objective, everybody has their issues and they project them around themselves. And he'll go on now and talk about depression being a very, very good example of this.
If you guys, many of you guys have been depressed at least one point in your life, it's actually very common for University of Toronto students, especially in their first year. It's about 1 in 3. If you give students the Beck Depression Inventory, about 1 in 3 University of Toronto students in our research have hit criteria for hospitalization. I mean, the Beck is a little oversensitive as far as I'm concerned, but you know what it's like when you're depressed? It's like it's a part of your personality sort of subsumes the whole, and depression quite classically is, well, you can't think of anything good that happened to you in the past, and you can't think of any reason why the present is good for anything, and you're pretty damn hopeless about the future. And so that's a complex as well, and it's a complex that consists of nothing but negative emotion, and it structures your memory and your perception and your plans for the future all at the same time.
Okay, so again, some excellent points made by Jordan Peterson here. Depression is it's an amazing thing because so many people suffer from it. Yet, if you look on Amazon, for example, and if you write a book on depression, very few people will buy it, and very few people are interested in watching videos on depression. So at any one time, 1/5 of the population of the world is depressed, but nobody wants to talk about it. So maybe we can classify this idea of depression as one of those things that falls into that secondary group, as something that you know, but you don't want to think about. Anyway, the point he's making here is that depression is basically a complex of negative thoughts. And very importantly, what he says here is that it creates your reality around you and your perspective. So it becomes a projection into your life because it becomes a filter that creates the whole way you perceive life is depressed. And that's why it's difficult to get rid of depression, is because you're locked into a certain way of viewing things. And I think that's a very, very important point to make.
Now, Freud had a very lengthy list of ways that people could be treacherous towards experiences they had that they wanted to repress. And so he called them defense mechanisms. This is how you fool yourself into believing that you don't have to take into account a certain set of negative experiences. You know, it's like, well, we'll go through them. Repression. Okay, well, we talked about that. Denial. Well, denial is a very complicated one. Well, there's a classic example for people who have, I think it's called anosognosia. I don't remember exactly. It's neglect. That's a less technical way of thinking about it. So let's say you have a right parietal damage from a stroke and you lose the left side of your body, so you can't move it anymore. But worse, you don't know it's there, and you don't know that the left side of anything is there anymore. And God only knows how that happens. But like, you'll only eat half the food on your plate, only on the right-hand side. And if someone asks you to draw a clock, you'll cram all the numbers into the one side. And so you kind of lose the idea of left. And I think it's sort of like, you know how when you're looking forward, there's nothing behind you. You can't see anything back here. It's not black. It's not even gone. It's just simply not there at all.
Okay, so here Jordan Peterson is talking about denial. He's giving the example of a stroke victim. So basically when a person has a stroke, they literally have no awareness of one side of their body. And he says that it's basically, it's not like you can't see it, it's like it's not there at all. And so they're basically in denial of one side of their body. So the result is similar to repression because it's not there, you can't see it. But the difference with repression and denial is with denial is right in front of you, you can see it, but you're not aware of it. Whereas repression is, you can't even see it, it's somewhere inside you. So technically they're different, but the result of repression and denial is extremely similar. But how they enter your awareness is different. So a person working through issues and uncovering something from repression will be like a sudden epiphany. We see there's people who do hypnotherapy and they go back and remember some trauma that they weren't aware of before. It suddenly pops into their conscious mind. They have an awareness, they have a memory, and it's like suddenly it's there. Whereas with denial, it's like, oh, it was always there, but I never thought about it. So different mechanism, different way of coming into the light, but similar effect in your daily life.
So for example, if people develop diabetes, for example, they're often not very good at taking their medication or regulating their diet. And you might say, well, they're denying the existence of their illness. And to some degree, they're probably doing that because who the hell wants to think that they're diabetic? But even worse than that, it's like, it's complicated to be diabetic. You're no longer the same person that you were. And so you have to learn a whole bunch of new ways to be this new person. What to eat, when to eat, how to check your blood. You have to be careful whenever you go out and eat. Like, there's 100 new things a day that you have to learn. And so separating denial from inability is a hard one, but you can also understand that people might deny, no, that's just not happening. I'm not going to admit to that.
Very good point that he made here regarding diabetes. And also that when is it disability, when is it inability, when is it denial, when is it inability. So, for example, many chronic people will not take their medication, but often they don't have their health to take the medication. Their mind is so scattered perhaps by their ill health. But yeah, I think if we look at many aspects of our lives that we're so in denial and it causes problems, like the person who's a heavy drinker, they know deep down that eventually it's going to kill them. The person who's got an obesity problem knows that eventually that their food addiction is going to kill them, but they deny it. The person who gets the blood tests don't look good, but they don't follow up with health care. Of course, the diabetic person, the blood pressure patient, etc. So it's an interesting thing. We have this instinct to try and deny, like the ostrich putting her head in the soil. It's a temporary relief, but in the long term, it doesn't really work for us. And if it's mental ill health, you can deny mental ill health and continue on. But with physical health, if you deny it, it results in chronic ill health, will eventually become acute ill health, and eventually that will kill you.
Reaction formation. Oh, that's one. Maybe you hate your sister, and maybe you have your reasons, but you shouldn't hate your sister. So what you do is act as if you really, really like her. That's an overcompensation. So that's another form of defense mechanism. Displacement. My boss yells at me, I yell at my husband yells at the baby bites the cat. Well, they're not really dealing with the problem, which is the boss. It's just pushed on down the road. And identification, you're bullied. And instead of coming to terms with the fact that bullying occurs, you start bullying other people. Rationalization, well, you know what that means already. You know, maybe you don't do your homework, you're procrastinating. I bet you can come up with 15 rationalizations, no problem, for why it's actually not necessary for you to do your homework right then. Intellectualization, well, Woody Allen's movies are about like that. He's got all these neurotic problems, but he's smart, and so he can come up with intelligent reasons why he's so messed up, even though he knows he's messed up and it doesn't help.
Okay, so Jordan Peterson here gives a big list of defense mechanisms continued, such as identification, rationalization, intellectualization, sublimation, and projection. And this could be pretty confusing, but I think a simpler way of thinking of it is simply that whether it's repression, which means something that's put into a part of our mind that we're totally even unaware exists, we have zero access to it until it eventually pops out, if it does pop out. Or whether it's some kind of denial, whereby we're kind of aware of it, but we're not touching it. Our mind is trying to protect ourselves. And so it uses every different mechanism you can think of. He was mentioning there Woody Allen movies. Woody Allen was, still is around, but a lot of us, you might even know who Woody Allen is. He was a very good comic writer, and then he got into comic acting, and he occasionally does movies now. He's pretty old, well into his 80s. But he always makes fun of psychoanalysis and going to the psychoanalyst. And that was because coming from New York, psychoanalysis was very popular, especially back 30, 40 years ago. And the funny part, I suppose, of his stories is that the person goes to the analyst, but nothing ever changes. They're still in a mess. But yeah, the basic thing to realize when we think of defense, it sounds very, psychological and technical. What's all this defense mechanisms? Things like these categorizations which psychologists and psychoanalysts and psychotherapists have come up with are simply handy ways of making sense of what the psychotherapist, the psychiatrist, the psychologist, what they see in their clinic, the counselor, what they see in their clinic on a daily basis. And that's basically that people they can see what's in front of them, but they're not aware of it. And it's very obvious that as a coping mechanism, we have all these different ways of defending ourselves from reality. So reality checking is the hardest thing to do, but unless we reality check, we can't really live our full lives, because we're trying to live while in denial or repressed from a big chunk of ourselves. So really, we have to integrate different aspects of ourselves. And Carl Gustav Jung was a very good guy at this. We talked about individuation, that we have to integrate the different aspects of ourselves. So nice little lecture clip from Jordan Peterson about repression and defense mechanisms. And the big takeaway is simply that which you cannot deal with, some part of your mind will either lock it away, or you'll simply not engage with it either way it's holding you back. And this comes into a concept which Carl Gustav Jung talks about, the shadow. The shadow is that which is part of you but you can't deal with for whatever reason. It's something you can't deal with, whether it's trauma or anxiety or some repressed aspect or something you're just in denial of, you just can't deal with it. Whatever it is, the problem, this is what Jung really notes very, very well, is that just because you can't see it doesn't mean it doesn't have an effect. We have this old saying of the elephant in the dining room, okay, that it's so big, but why are you walking around? And we do this all the time in society. We as groups of people, we avoid dealing with certain situations, and as individuals as well. And the big takeaway really is, forget the technicality, just think of it this way. That which is there in your life as an issue, but you're either not aware with it or not engaging with it, it's still there objectively in your reality. It's still affecting you whether you realize it or not. And the more aware you become, the more likely you are to be able to have a go at integrating it, or at least to some degree integrating it into your life. And the more you can integrate the diverse aspects of yourself into your life, the more integrated and well-balanced your personality will be. The more you integrate your personality, the more you have all the good stuff, such as peace of mind, being yourself, being grounded, centered, and happy as a human being is something to strive for. That's the real takeaway I think we could take away from this video if we get deeper into it. I hope you like this video. Please like and subscribe if you do, and I'll talk to you next time.